Oh, my. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, my heart is full. Good morning, my beautiful sisters. Good morning. Well, let me first start by congratulating Essence on this 25th anniversary of the Essence Festival. Congratulations. And it is 25 years strong. And of course, it is so good to be back in New Orleans. So I've got a limited amount of time, but I want to share with you a couple things about my background and some ideas and plans that I have. But I do want to start by thanking everybody here, because this is a room full of leaders, and I cannot thank you enough for everything you do every day. So, about my background, I am a daughter of the Civil Rights Movement. I grew up in a family and in a community of adults who spent full time marching and shouting about this thing called justice. My sister Maya and I, we were raised by a mother who was all of 5 feet tall, but if you ever met her, you would have thought she was 7 feet tall. And our mother, she taught us the importance of a good education. She taught us the good old-fashioned value of hard work. She taught us, don't let anyone tell you who you are, you tell them who you are. And she taught us not only to dream, but to do. And she taught us to believe in our power to right what is wrong. And she was the kind of parent that if you ever came home complaining about something, our mother would look at you, maybe with one hand on her hip and with a very straight face, she would say, well, what are you going to do about it? So I decided to run for President of the United States. And look, we all know there is a lot that is wrong with the current occupant of the White House. He says he wants to make America great again. Well, what exactly does again mean? Back before the Civil Rights Act? Back before the Voting Rights Act? Back before Roe v. Wade? Back before the Fair Housing Act? Well, Essence, we're not going back. We're not going back. And in fact, it is time to turn the page, and it is time to write the next chapter in the history of these United States. And I'd ask that we take a look at, and I urge everyone to read, the Black Census Project that has been headed by Alicia Garza, and look at that as our guide. So it's the largest survey of Black people in America since Reconstruction. And it demands action, recognizing the many facets of Black life that must be addressed. And in my opinion, it is a guide to right what is wrong in America. So you know how sometimes people will say, and they say it certainly to me often, because I was, of course, the first Black woman to be elected DA of San Francisco. I was the first Black person to be elected Attorney General of California, only the second Black woman to be elected to the United States Senate in the history of our country. And so, you know, people will often come up to me and they will say, well, Kamala, talk to us a little bit about Black people's issues. And I look at them and I say, you know what? I am so glad you want to talk about the economy. I am so glad you want to talk about health care. I am so glad you want to talk about the racial wealth gap. And let's talk about national security while we're at it. And let's talk about the dreams people have for our children. So let's talk a little bit about all of that. Let's start with economic security. The Black Census shows us that in the last year, nearly half of Black families in America said they did not have enough money to pay a monthly bill. It found that a third of Black families cut back on food because they could not afford it. And for every dollar white men earn, Black women in America earn 61 cents. So we must right what is wrong with the economy and pass my LIFT Act, which will give every family making under $100,000 a year a tax credit that they can collect at up to $500 a month. Economists have described it as the most significant middle-class tax cut we've had in generations. We must right what is wrong and take action on equal pay, with my plan that puts the burden on corporations not working women to prove that they've been paid equally for equal work. We must right what is wrong and close the teacher pay gap to give millions of teachers, the vast majority of whom are women, a raise. And I say to them, so you want to talk about Black issues? Let's talk about health care also. So nearly 1/3 of folks in the Black census said they put off seeing a doctor because they could not afford it. We know that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in connection with childbirth. And we know that Black communities across this country are dealing with water that is not safe to drink. We must right what is wrong with public health policy and pass Medicare for all in this country. And we must right what is wrong and pass my maternal mortality bill so that Black women in America are taken seriously when they walk in that doctor's office, in that clinic, or in that hospital. We must right what is wrong and finally treat access to clean drinking water like what it should be, a fundamental right. And ladies, if we're going to right what is wrong, let's deal with the racial wealth gap in our country, which is why today, here at the Essence Festival, I am releasing a new plan to start closing the wealth gap. And here's how it works. So a typical Black family has just $10 of wealth for every $100 held by a white family. So we must right that wrong. And after generations of discrimination, give Black families a real shot at home ownership. Historically, one of the most powerful drivers of wealth in our country. So I will remove the barriers that Black Americans face when they go to qualify for a home loan. I will strengthen anti-discrimination lending laws and implement stricter enforcement. And I'll invest through the federal government $100 billion to put home ownership within the reach for those who live in redlined communities, and it would help up to 4 million families with down payments and closing costs. And by taking these steps, we can shrink the wealth gap between Black and white households by at least 1/3. But we cannot bridge the racial wealth gap just by addressing historical inequities. Although we must do that, we also have to write the next chapter. Black Americans were excluded in our country for years and generations from participating in the first industrial revolution and the wealth that that generated. Now, with the technological revolution, we must ensure that everyone can participate in the wealth it creates. And to do that, I will invest in our HBCUs. I am a proud graduate of Howard University. I will invest in our HBCUs the resources they need to develop world-class STEM programming to ensure that our students have a real opportunity to shape the technological revolution. And here's the thing. Those of us who are proud graduates of HBCUs know. HBCUs graduate nearly 1 in 4 students who earn science and engineering degrees. They are our future. And in the coming weeks, I'll announce new investments to support Black entrepreneurs and business owners by increasing access to capital and credit. So in closing, by taking these challenges on, we can close that gap. And that not only lifts up Black America, it lifts up all of America. So Essence, join me as we right what is wrong and write the next chapter of history in our country. Because Black women know, we know America's story has always been written by those who can see what can be, unburdened by what has been. And just think, less than 60 years ago today, Ruby Bridges needed federal marshals to escort her to school in New Orleans. And today, Mayor LaToya Cantrell is the first woman and the first Black woman to lead this city. The fight of Black women has always been fueled and grounded in faith and in the belief of what is possible. We have always built the future that we can see and believe in and fight for. And that's why Sojourner spoke. It's why May flew. It's why Rosa and Claudette sat. It's why Maya wrote. It's why Fannie organized. It's why Shirley ran, and why I stand here as a candidate for President of the United States.
Senator Kamala Harris. We are going to have a little conversation, but let me acknowledge, and I know that Rich Lou would want me to do this, we're honored to have in our presence the founder of Essence Magazine, Brother Ed Lewis. Give him a big hand. And I'll take personal privilege to acknowledge one of the strongest voices in Black America, Roland Martin, in the audience. Senator Harris, as you spoke, and as the polls have indicated, you have now become, you are growing and growing and growing in terms of support. One of the things in public life is that we all look back and say, people attack this, people attack that. Are there any things that you would do differently if you could, that it seems like others in the race do not have the capacity or maturity to say things maybe should have been decided differently? Is there anything you would say that, as you have come on this journey of yours, that you look at and say, I would tweak that a little differently now?
There's so much. I mean, there's so much about our history that we can certainly celebrate. We just celebrated the 4th of July and our independence. But there is so much about our history that, that we should acknowledge was nothing to celebrate and a lot to be shameful about. And we need to correct course. And that relates to everything. You can look at And you can also look at, Rev, you can look at what has happened historically and also see the vestiges that linger and that are present today. I talked about the Voting Rights Act and that we're not going to go back to a day before the Voting Rights Act. But yet, we had a United States Supreme Court that in 2013, through the Shelby v. Holder decision, gutted the Voting Rights Act, and immediately after it was passed, in over 20 states, they passed legislation that was designed to restrict access for black people to vote, and Native Americans and students. There was one case out of North Carolina where the Court of Appeals said that the law that legislature passed was written with, and then I'm going to quote, written with surgical precision to prevent or get in the way of folks voting. So we certainly can talk a lot about history, but I'd like to also talk about it in the context of current day. But there's a lot to be shameful about. I mean, as you know, most recently, we have talked about America's segregated schools. And historically, we knew that to be true. You know, I was bused to my elementary school, Brown v. Board of Education, led by Thurgood Marshall, and a unanimous Supreme Court said segregation was wrong. It was against the Constitution and the values of the Constitution of the United States. 1954. I have met so many people who up until the late 70s, and there's still mandatory busing that exists today in America, know that there is still segregation in our schools. And now we're seeing that actually, because we had so much flight out of public schools after Brown v. Board of Education, that the segregation persists, now not necessarily a function of legislators who are trying to pass laws to segregate or prevent integration, but just because there has been a drawing out of the resources in public schools that have left poor children and children of color in public schools and left the schools to be segregated. And that is one of my highest priorities. We have got to deal with that and speak truth about the realities of America today, in addition to our history.
Do you, as you know, many people want to see this president have to face a very tough election and not be reelected. Yes. Do you feel that you will be able, if you are the nominee, to face and stand up to a president who we know has no barriers, no filter? We do know he's afraid of prosecutors, so you have that advantage. But are you convinced deep down inside that you are ready for the fight if you're the nominee with this kind of president?
I'm ready. So but I'm going to give you a little bit more about why I know that we are ready and I'm ready. Because here's the thing. In my experience, I have taken on all kinds of predators. I've taken on the big banks who preyed on homeowners during the foreclosure crisis. I took on successfully pharmaceutical companies that preyed on seniors. I have successfully taken on transnational criminal organizations that have preyed on women and children. And I'm going to tell you, we have a predator living in the White House. He has predatory instincts and a predatory nature. And here's the thing you got to know about predators. It is their nature to pounce on and try to beat down people they perceive to be weak. It is their nature to attack vulnerable people. It is their nature to attack people who are desperate for help. And I know that kind of person, and that's who we have. And let me tell you the other thing about predators. They are cowards. They are cowards. We have a president who would prefer to buddy up with the president of Russia instead of trusting the American intelligence community when it comes to the fact that Russia interfered in the election of the president of the United States. We have a so-called commander-in-chief who would prefer to buddy up with a North Korean dictator instead of listening to the American intelligence community about an American student who was tortured and later died. We have a so-called commander-in-chief who would prefer to buddy up with a Saudi prince instead of listening to the American intelligence community when they tell us that there was a journalist who was assassinated, a journalist who had American credentials. We need a new commander-in-chief.
Essence, with its new technology, has taken a lot of surveys from the concerns of its readers online as well as the magazine. And Michelle Ebanks, our CEO, is going to raise some of those questions.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton. Senator Harris, we know that black women are not a monolith. We come in all diverse hues and shapes and ideas about our future. But in our survey, there are two issues that stood out that were important to many black women. Yeah. One, abortion as a choice.
Yes.
And two, the elimination of student debt.
Yes.
Could you talk about those two issues?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Michelle, and it's so wonderful to be on the stage with you. So here's the thing. In America today, a woman's access to reproductive health care is under attack. And we have seen it in Alabama, where that legislature passed a law that would incarcerate a physician for assisting with an abortion for up to 99 years. We're seeing it in Georgia and in Missouri. It's real. And here's the thing about it, and this is not being extreme to say this. It is not being an alarmist to say this. Women will die because of these policies, and black women, women of color, and poor women will be the first. It's a serious, serious issue. What I'm prepared to do is this. We got to keep on the defensive. Elections matter. Who gets elected to the state house matters because they get to pass those laws. So we have to focus on those state elections. Focus on who's the attorney general of your state, because they often will be the ones to either defend those laws or not. But also, in addition to working on the defensive, I'm prepared to work on the offensive. So here's what I'm prepared to do. When elected, I am prepared to require that the United States Department of Justice will review any law coming out of any state that has a history of interfering with a woman's access to choice, that law will be reviewed for constitutionality by the Justice Department, pre-clearance, and until it passes constitutional muster and compliance with Roe v. Wade, it will not go into effect. Because we got to take it on the offensive in addition to the defensive. On the issue of student loan debt, there is no question. And it is, I speak to our young people who are literally concerned that they will never be able to start a family, that they'll not be able to ever afford to buy a house. They're going into careers that are not their passion because they can't afford to pay off that student loan debt. Careers like teaching, because they know that with that debt and the low pay, they can't possibly survive financially. So one, I believe, and we'll fight for what we need to do around one, free community college, debt-free college. We need to allow students to refinance those loans, loan forgiveness for middle class and working families, loan forgiveness for people who enter public service, and we also need to go after the predators in this space who are pushing these loans and servicing these loans in a predatory way. We need to go after them also.
One of the things that we talked about is how this man, Rich Lou Dennis, brought this institution back into ownership in our community and changed our culture just from pursuing consumer to pursuing being entrepreneurs. He has some keen business interests that he'd like to raise to you.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here. And you've hit on some things that are very critical to our community around economic inclusion. Yeah. You've proposed some new legislation, some new approaches to closing the wealth gap, yep. Improving the education system that serves us. What I would like to understand, and I think the audience would like to understand, is how do we as a community support this movement around economic inclusion
Yeah.
and partner with our leaders
Yeah.
in order to do that. Because at the end of the day, we're only going to be as strong as a community as we can be economically. So
That's right.
how would we do that?
That's right. And just to actually couple the 2 points, because on the student loan debt issue, you know, my target for home ownership for families is based on a number of reasons that relate to the fact that that is the greatest source of assets and wealth that a family can have. And we have been institutionally and historically deprived legally from having access to that source of wealth. And it has a lot of repercussions, including when our kids want to go to college, whereas other families who own their home and can go into the equity in their home to help pay for their students' tuition, our families have to go, and those students have to take out loans at interest rates that they can't afford to pay off over a long period of time. So the way to handle it is a number of things. One, it's about demanding change, right? So part of what I'm rolling out today would include changing the way credit scores are kept. Because here's why. So right now, the analysis of whether you have good credit or not doesn't include the fact that you pay your phone bill on time. Doesn't include the fact that you pay your rent on time or your utilities on time. So people who are living a financially responsible life, right? It's not tracking your level of financial responsibility. And that's part of what has to change, which is the design of the system. Because the system has been designed on credit history to track people who already have wealth and assets. So then the folks who are financially responsible but don't have assets don't have access to capital because your good behaviors aren't being measured, right? So that's one way to deal with it. And demand that kind of change. Demand that kind of change. It is about, you know, again, I'm going to keep going back to this other point. Elections matter. They really do. You know, look, don't hate the player, hate the game, right? Who gets elected gets to write the rules. They get to make the decisions. And so I really cannot urge folks enough. Be involved in your local elections, in your statewide elections, obviously in the national elections. But it really does make a difference because we have to start at the ground up as well. And it's also about saying that, look, we as a community, we are huge as a consumer. Right? We're spending a lot of money even though we don't have assets and accumulated wealth. And so it is also about leveraging that to require that we are given the right kind of financial arrangements that are reflective of what we are contributing to the economy, right? And so all of that is at play.
I mean, I think it's extraordinary that you're thinking this through in this way, because what's been missing, I think, from our politicians and what's been missing from our politics and what's been missing even from our businesses is providing the processes, structures, and infrastructure that allow us to overcome these issues and to create wealth. The one thing that I would encourage is that we start to think about what are those things beyond home ownership in these new economies that are developing that we can actually now start to leverage as well.
And I'm actually going to be, so I announced the home ownership piece today. We're going to be rolling out very soon, but around entrepreneurship, which of course for black women is black women are the largest group among the demographics who are building entrepreneurship and in that way growing the economy of our country. And we need to make it easier and allow and facilitate that innovation and that economic strength that is a natural part of our community. Yes, so I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Looking forward to it.
All right, Senator Kamala Harris, thank you.
All right.